Hello everyone, I'd like to take this time to welcome you to the first of the Symposium at Your Fingertips Lunch and Learn webinar series. For the next few weeks leading up to our policy symposium in April, we'll have hour-long webinars every Thursday at 12:30 p.m. featuring some guest presenters dealing with the topics that will help you be prepared for the conference in April. Next week we'll have Joan Helfer from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities talking about the federal budget. The following week, we'll have Laura Boinford from New America's Early Education Initiative talking about the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA. After that, we'll have Jerry Henchy from the Food Research and Action Center talking about promoting good nutrition and food security in child care, including the Child and Adult Care Food Program, CACFP. And for the last of our series, our own social media expert, Sarah Miller, will be talking about the ways to use social media during Symposium. I'd like to take this time to introduce myself. My name is Nick Fusick, and I handle government affairs at Child Care Aware of America. I'd like to welcome you to our Lunch and Learn for today, How a Bill Becomes a Law, which will talk about the extremely important and complex legislative process. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, there's a box you can type your questions into, and there will be time at the end of the webinar to answer some of the questions. I'd also like to mention that if you have any questions about Symposium, you can feel free to ask them here. We have Sarah Miller, who would be happy to answer any Symposium questions while you're at it. All right, so how a bill becomes a law. Although the legislative process is extremely complex and is understandably confusing, there are a few basic steps that every bill must pass through to become a law. So the basics of the process are that a bill is introduced in either the House or the Senate and referred to the committee with the appropriate jurisdiction, basically which committee covers that issue. And the committee will typically hold hearings and then vote on it. If it makes it out of committee, the bill then goes to the floor of the respective chamber for debate, and then the full membership of that chamber votes on it. If it passes in one chamber, it will either go to the other chamber for a vote, or if the other chamber has been working on a similar bill that is passed, the two bills will go to conference, where the differences will be worked out and agreed upon, at which point both chambers will vote on that bill again. If it passes, then it will head to the President's desk for their signature to become a law. Sounds pretty simple, right? The reality is that the process is a little more complex than that. As this infographic from the Library of Congress shows, the legislative process is far more complex than I just discussed in the last slide. Obviously, to go through this entire chart might take a little more than an hour to explain, but we're going to touch upon some of the main steps in this process throughout. The first place we need to talk about is some of the key terms to know when you're talking about the legislative process. Obviously, the most important term today is a bill. A bill is the most commonly used form for legislation. A bill is prefixed with an HR in the House and with an S in the Senate. A number signed at that time of introduction signifies the order in which a bill was introduced during a Congress. A bill only becomes law if it is passed with identical languages by both houses and signed by the President or passed over his veto. The next term that's going to be important today is an act. An act is legislation that is passed both chambers of Congress in identical form, been signed into law by the President or passed over his veto, thus becoming law. Also, related is law, which is similar, which is an act of Congress that has been signed by the President or passed over his veto by Congress. The next important term to know is committee. A committee is a subdivision of the Senate or House that considers legislation, conducts hearings and investigations, or carries out other assignments as instructed by the chamber. Most committees are divided into specialized subcommittees. For example, the House Appropriations Committee has a subcommittee on labor, health, and human services and education, which deals on issues similar to that. The next important term, one that we've heard a lot about recently regarding filibusters, is cloture, which is a procedure to close off debate. The Senate can vote to invoke a cloture or limit time on consideration of a bill or other matter, and thereby overcome a filibuster. A cloture petition requires 60 votes to pass, unlike most motions or measures, which only require a majority to pass of 51 votes. Our second to last term is conference. A conference is a temporary panel composed of House and Senate members formed for the purpose of negotiating differences in legislation that has passed both chambers. So once a bill has come out of both chambers, a conference is formed to talk about that bill and try to get it, into one bill so that it can be passed again and then signed. And lastly, the last term that's important to note today is the veto, which is a procedure established under the Constitution by which the President refuses to approve a bill or joint resolution and thus prevents its enactment into law. A regular veto occurs when the President returns the legislation to the House in which it originated. The President usually returns a vetoed bill with a message indicating his reasons for rejecting the measure. The veto can be overridden only by a two-thirds vote in both the Senate and the House. On to our first step. Thousands of bills are introduced every Congress in the House and Senate, but very few bills are actually enacted into law. Any member can introduce a bill. The only restrictions on bill introduction are that the chamber in which the bill is introduced must be in session, i.e. open for business that day, and senators can only introduce a bill in the Senate, and members of the House of Representatives can only introduce a bill in the House. As I mentioned before, Senate bills begin with an S, and House bills begin with an HR. Once a bill has been introduced and assigned a bill number, it is referred to the committee which has jurisdiction over the subject matter in the bill for consideration. It's important to remember that if a bill is introduced in one Congress and it does not pass before that Congress ends, it must be reintroduced in the next Congress in order to be considered again. For instance, a bill could die in committee, meaning that it was not approved by the committee, or a bill could be approved by a committee but not by the full Senate or House. Short of passage and signing by the President, a bill must be reintroduced each Congress in order to be considered. So sometimes a bill will go through several sessions of Congress before being reintroduced again and again before being finally passed. For example, the Child Care and Development Block Grant and the Family and Medical Leave Act are two bills that were introduced in each Congress for nearly a decade before becoming a law, CCDGB in 1990 and FMLA in 1993. Well, once a bill is introduced, the next step in the process is committee action. What happens here is there's usually two stages in committee action. The first is hearings and the second is marks up. And for hearings, each committee in the House and Senate has a committee chairman who determines the hearing schedules for full committees. In turn, the subcommittee chairman determines the hearing schedule for the subcommittee. Sometimes hearings are held on specific bills, while other times they are held to explore an issue without a specific bill in mind. Hearings offer opportunities for members to learn more about issues or bills, or they can be used to heighten attention on an issue and push a certain agenda. People who testified at hearings are called witnesses, and the members listen to testimony and often ask questions. Usually hearings are great for members to kind of get better educated on the issues, to hear about, what witnesses from different backgrounds think about a certain issue, and help them form a little bit stronger opinion about a bill that might be up for consideration. The next step is a markup. The markup is a public meeting where members consider legislation, amendments may be offered, and a vote on the legislation and amendments may occur. Some committees hold markups at the subcommittee level and repeat the process before the full committee. Other committees hold markups only at the full committee level. Once a bill has been approved, a committee report is drafted and filed. The committee report provides an overview of the bill, background as to why the bill is needed and what it seeks to address, a section-by-section analysis of the bill, and a cost estimate conducted by the Congressional Budget Office. The committee report may also include a section called Minority Views or Additional Views, which gives an opportunity to members who disagree with the bill or portions of the bill a chance to explain their views. So at this point, you have a bill that has been in the committee, it's been talked about, it's starting to gather some steam, some momentum behind it. It's starting to round into what it might look like, and if it's passed out by the committee, the next step is going to the chamber. Well, the important thing to remember about the chamber is there are two different worlds when they hit the floor. After a bill has been approved by a committee, it must be approved by the full Senate or House of Representatives, depending on which chamber is introduced in. As I said before, only bills introduced in the Senate will be considered in the Senate until passed, or vice versa. So you won't see a House bill considered in the Senate unless it has already been passed out of the House. I'm going to start off by explaining a little bit about the process in each. The House Rules Committee acts as a gatekeeper to the House floor. Generally, the House Rules Committee determines a rule for consideration of each bill, including the length of time for debate on a bill, the amendments that will be considered, and any special rules. For instance, adoption of the rule on the bill may waive any Budget Act point of order that could otherwise be invoked. The House referred to this as suspension of the rules. Under this process, debate is limited to 40 minutes and no amendments may be offered. For a measure to pass under suspension, it needs to be approved by a 2/3 vote. As far as the House is concerned, politics plays a lot more into it. Whether or not a bill comes to debate, comes to the floor, has many more factors than the Senate. It is tightly controlled, so you won't see just any bill coming up. It has to be something that has a lot of momentum, typically a lot of co-sponsors, and that typically has a lot of backing to it. And when this happens, generally the outcome is not a surprise. The bills that are voted on will either be defeated pretty largely, passed pretty largely, or will be voted on by party lines. On the Senate side, it's a little bit different. The Senate does not have a gatekeeping committee like the House Rules Committee. In the Senate, the majority leader determines the floor schedule, ideally by consent of the minority leader, but not always. In general, the Senate operates by consent. The majority leader requests consent to consider a bill. Most of the time, consent is granted and the debate begins on a bill. However, if the majority leader asks consent to proceed to consider a bill and fails to get it, he can try again at another time or begin debating the bill anyway. And the debate will technically be on the motion to proceed to debate on the bill. So basically, if the majority leader wants a bill to be debated, there's a good chance he'll be able to, but he might have to go through some hoops first to get it there. Additionally, if opponents of the bill do not yield and allow debate to begin, which is technically called a filibuster, a delaying action achieved through talking or making speeches and not yielding the floor, the majority leader can file a cloture petition, which requires 60 votes to shut off debate. If cloture fails, the majority leader generally pulls the bill from consideration. For example, in 2004, an amendment to increase the minimum wage was offered on the Senate floor to welfare reauthorization legislation. The author of the amendment wanted to press for a vote on the amendment. Although it was not clear he had a majority of votes for support, the majority leader did not want to vote on that version of the amendment. He filed cloture. When the vote to invoke cloture failed, he pulled the bill from consideration on the Senate floor. As a result, the 108th Congress adjourned later in the year and welfare reauthorization legislation was not completed. If cloture is successful, debate on the bill occurs and amendments can be offered. However, there is a limitation because post-cloture, all amendments must be germane, which means related to the bill. Unlike the House, in the Senate, any member can offer any amendment on any bill at any time, except to the budget resolution, budget reconciliation bills, which have special rules. For regular bills, in order to limit the number of amendments, the time on amendments, and come to a final passage on a bill, the majority leader must gain consent. He does this in general by talking to other members and operating a hotline to each office. For example, the hotline might say, the majority leader has the following unanimous consent request, that it be in order to vote final passage on a bill at 5 p.m. tonight. If he gains consent, the vote will occur at 5 p.m. If there are objections, then the majority leader or the floor managers of the bill being considered need to figure out what the problem is and how to address it. Sometimes bills that are not controversial are approved by voice vote. Technically, that means that there was a consent to take up and pass the bill by voice vote. No objections were raised, and therefore consent was granted to pass the bill. Most often bills that pass by voice vote occur at night immediately preceding adjournment for the day and are typically non-controversial bills that would not need a roll call. Well, if a bill passes in one chamber, it will either go to the other chamber for a vote, or if the other chamber has been working on a similar bill that has passed, the two bills will go to conference. Once a bill passes the House and Senate, it is referred to as a joint House-Senate conference committee, where members from both chambers negotiate the differences in the two chambers' bill. Essentially, the members go through each bill looking for similarities and differences and then negotiate each provision. Once the conference version of the bill is approved, which is called a conference report, it must be approved by the House and the Senate. Conference reports are not amendable. However, it is possible to strike provisions from a conference report. This doesn't happen very often, but it is a powerful tool because when conferees are negotiating, there's always a threat that some provision could be stricken during floor consideration. That might be average leverage to not include it. If a provision is stricken by one chamber and the other chamber had previously approved the bill containing the stricken provision, that bill must be reapproved since both chambers have to approve the exact same bill. For example, in December of 2005, the House of Representatives passed the Budget Reconciliation Bill, reducing federal spending by $40 billion over the next 5 years. During Senate floor consideration of the bill, a point of order was raised against several provisions in the bill. They were minor provisions, but nevertheless, the result was that they were stricken from the text of the bill. This meant that the version of the bill the Senate passed was not exactly the same as the version that the House passed. The House had already adjourned for Christmas. Therefore, in February of 2006, when the House was back in session, the revised Budget Reconciliation Bill was finally approved, and the measure moved to the President for a signature. Which brings us to the next step. Once a version is agreed upon that is the exact same in both chambers, the bill then moves to the President's desk. Once a bill is approved by the House and the Senate, negotiated through conference, and the conference report is approved by the House and the Senate, it is finally sent to the President for a signature to become law. So as you see here, all of these presidents are, signing their John Hancock on very important laws that have been passed in the past that have all started out as an idea or concept that were turned into a bill. Just to look back a little bit, the legislative process and review. First off, as I mentioned, a bill is introduced. It's then sent to the committee, which is relevant to its jurisdiction. So say if you have a healthcare-related one, it would be sent to the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, or it could be sent to a subcommittee from there. Or if it's on the budget, it will be sent to the Budget Senate Committee, and so on and so forth. So the committee has hearings on it, tries to get more information about it. And then it goes to a markup process, which the bill is kind of, tabulated and made to reflect kind of the will of the members of that committee. And once its markup is finished, it's voted on by both, usually the subcommittee and the full committee. If it makes it out of committee, it goes to the floor, which we talked about as the full committee, or the full Senate or House membership votes on it. Then, like I said, it can either, if there's another similar bill in the other chamber, it'll go to a conference, and if not, there's it'll be sent directly to the other floor for consideration. But if it goes to conference, the lawmakers appointed by the leaders of each chamber agree to work out differences and try to get a bill that's, desired by both parties. And what this allows for is, basically everyone to have a say on the bill and make sure that although it may not be exactly what everybody's looking for, it does what it's set out to accomplish. It still has some of the key provisions that were in it when it started, and allows for both the Senate and House to compromise on bills. Once it finishes with the conference report, the conference report is voted on in both floors, and if nothing is changed, it is sent to the President for a signature, which then becomes law. So as I kind of talked about, it's a very complex but simple process. If you wanted to get into it, you could literally spend 3 to 4 hours talking about some of the more intricate detail in it, some of the stuff. If you've been paying attention to the news, there's been big talk of a filibuster, and that's just opening debate on a nomination, which is not something that's typically filibustered. So there's a whole bunch of different, kind of unique things that could happen that take this off path a little bit. And it's important to remember that so many bills are introduced each Congress that only a small percentage pass, about 1 or 2% each Congress pass. So that brings me to my next point. There's many places to impact policy. With how complex it is, it's extremely messy, and the outcome is never certain. To get a bill into law, it takes a lot of stars to align in your favor. You have to have the support. You have to have the public support, the congressional support. You have to have a large advocacy campaign around it. You have to have, the media's attention. And it has to be something that's, pretty large problem that a large group of people are looking to fix, and it has to click at the right time. You want members who are interested in that particular topic, working on it in key positions, and you want to make sure that, whatever bill you see is a priority for them. As I said with the conference report, one of the main things is compromise. It takes compromise, shared vision to address any issue to get a bill out. One thing we saw in the last Congress, the 112th Congress, was that the Health, Education, and Labor, the Senate and House did not have a conference on any education bill throughout the entire 112th Congress. So sometimes it can be hard to even get to that point, but when it does happen, there's usually a good chance that it's going to be something that both chambers can agree on and get some real action going on. But to get there, it takes a lot of compromise from the members. You have to remember that when you're working with two different viewpoints, it takes a lot to get to a middle ground on it sometimes. So you'll see a lot of members will be upset or might threaten pulling support for a bill because of certain provisions struck. But the important thing is to make sure the bill is largely intact, to make sure it accomplishes what it set out to. And last thing, one thing is certain. Process, policy, and politics all play a role in the process. From idea to law, it takes a lot to do there, and there are many, many places to impact policy. As advocates, you can have an impact on every step, the process, the policy, and the politics. You have the ability to impact it, to make sure your voice is heard, to make sure the people you're fighting for or the issues you're fighting for are well received and heard by your representatives and senators, and make sure that influences their decisions. All right, at this point, I'm going to open up for some questions about the legislative process or about Symposium. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. Don't hesitate. All right, we got our first question in. It's just talking about, how bills are named, if there's any significance to, why a bill might have a certain name, or, like No Child Left Behind or the Family and Medical Leave Act. Usually, bills have two names. They have a long title and a short title, which is actually part of the bill text. And usually the long title kind of is more descriptive. It tells you what it is, what it kind of does, and what year it was introduced. So if you have a bill that is introduced this year, we'll say the So-and-so Act of 2013. And then the short title, what that does, it's kind of, something catchy, something to hopefully grab some public attention. You'll see stuff like the CARE Act, C-A-R-E, that, or the KIDS Act, or even No Child Left Behind. And what these do are, it's an easy way to reference the bill. So when they talk about them with other members, they, don't have to go through the title each time. And it's a way, something kind of lighthearted to help draw public support for it. So you'll see, it's a lot easier to say CCDGB as opposed to the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act of 1990 every time you reference it. This is the same for almost every bill. Most bills introduced will have, easier name to remember it by. As far as significance goes or impact on the bill, like I said, it's mainly just for public sentiment. All right. Any other questions? This is an absolutely great question. Is there a bad time or a best time to meet with offices to talk about an issue of concern? There's never really a bad time to meet with offices, especially for an issue of concern. The best time is to do it when it's, it's something that's either in the news or it's something on the public spectrum or something they're considering. So if they're considering, say, CCDGB reauthorization and you have an issue that you think is important for that, or you have a concern regarding that, that's, usually the best time to get in there and strike while the iron is hot. Kind of while it's on their mind. Their staffers are probably researching it, trying to get a little bit better idea about it, trying to figure out, what they can do, and they'll reach out. Usually when they're considering an important bill, they'll reach out through the constituents in one way or another and ask for their feedback, or they'll be looking for it. So when a bill is getting worked on, that's usually the best time to get in there. All right, let's see if we have any other questions. Oh, this is a good question. If a bill is passed in the state legislature, how does that bill get brought up in Congress? Does it have the same name? Well, when a bill is passed in the state legislature, it is only enacted in that state. So, say Virginia was to pass a law banning or requiring comprehensive background checks, it would not mean that every state has to do it in the Congress. So usually what happens, though, is a senator or representative may have had some hand in it while they're in the state legislature when that bill was being worked on, or they may be following closely, or their staffers may be in contact with, the state legislator. And once the bill is passed in there, they'll take it up, but it's done separately. So, using the example of comprehensive background checks in North Carolina, it was passed in North Carolina, and Senator Burr saw that it was passed in North Carolina. He liked the general idea of it, so he wrote a bill that basically did the same thing but on a federal level. Although they were similar bills, it wasn't from one step to the other. It wasn't like they took the bill and just tried to take it up to the federal level. It was a new bill, completely detached from everything else. It just accomplished a similar goal on a federal level. And at the same time, it could have the same name. There's nothing that says it couldn't. It could, really have everything identical. It could have the exact same language. It would just have a different marker once introduced. And, it kind of depend on what happens at the federal level, what they're looking for, if they think it's going to help them. And all right, let's see if we have any other questions. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in. Just had a question asking if the webinar is recorded and if it will be possible to get the slides. Yes, if you're interested in watching this webinar again, may have thought it was a little, I may have spoken a little too fast or too slow, or you wanted to catch something. Again, the webinar will be recorded and it will be available via our website and a link that will be sent to you. And the slides will be available for you at any point on our website, on our advocacy toolkit, for you to take a look at and review or pass them along or whatever you may do. Let me see if there's any more questions. Is there a way a bill can be reconsidered if it is rejected in committee? Oh, that's an absolutely great question. In order to be reconsidered in committee, a new bill would actually have to be reintroduced. So if it's referred to committee, usually that bill, if it doesn't go anywhere, it will either die in committee or it may not even make it to the markup stage, at which point it would die. And the only way to get another bill introduced is to reintroduce it. Usually if a bill dies in committee, most members won't reintroduce it unless there's something easy enough to change in that wouldn't affect the general quality of the bill, the general idea of the bill, without completely knocking the bill out. So you have a bill that has 10 provisions, and 3 main provisions are fine, but the other 7 provisions are very controversial, which are the reason behind why it died. Those seven provisions could be struck. The bill could be reintroduced as a new bill, and then it could be reconsidered. Outside of that, it doesn't really happen often because usually the reason bills don't go to markup or consideration or because they're controversial or not that exciting or there's just not enough momentum behind them. So usually if that's the case, there's no real momentum to reintroduce the bill. All right, let's see if we have any other questions. This is a good one. Can we reach out to our members of Congress in our states, or do we have to come to D.C. to talk to them? Coming to D.C. never hurts. If you're in D.C., it's a great time to meet with your members, but that does not mean that's the only way to talk to them. All of your senators and representatives have district offices which are located within usually a pretty reasonable distance to their home states or their home districts. And the important thing is you'll talk a lot with staff in either their district offices or their DC offices. So even if you can't meet with the member when they're in the district, you may be able to meet with one of their staffers who would be able to relay that message to the members in the DC staff. Also, a lot of the times members will reach out or go on recess to their districts, at which point when they're on recess, they'll be home for a while, and they do this to kind of get, familiarity. They'll try to do it to gain familiarity with the constituents, try to get issues. They'll occasionally hold town halls and try to, just kind of get a general issue policy brief from their constituents, find out what's relevant to them. Excuse me. So we have another question. What is a spot bill and a trailer bill? Are there types of bills? If so, what are they? Thank you. This is a great question. A spot bill is something you see a lot of times in state legislators, but you don't see them in the federal government because they're typically ruled unconstitutional. It's kind of a complex thing to explain, but basically, trying to think of an easy way to explain this. Let me say this. A spot bill, it doesn't really exist in Congress, in the U.S. Congress, but it does exist in state legislators. The problem is it has been ruled unconstitutional in state legislators like California, so it's not really a big issue federally. A trailer bill, what a trailer bill is there's two types of trailer bills. There's a trailer bill and a rider bill. A trailer bill is basically a similar type bill, or features a similar idea that is tracked onto another bill so that they can accomplish the same thing and maybe garner other support. And then there's a rider, which is either an amendment or a bill in a different chamber that is pretty identical or close and tries to accomplish the same general thing. I think we have one more question. There's actually two good questions here. How do we find out when recess is, and how do I know when my state legislators are meeting? Is there a website I can use to check? You can either look on your representatives or senators' sites. Most of them have an event calendar, when they're going to be in the district. The other way you can do it is if you go to Child Care Aware's website and you go to our In the States map page, there's a listing of when they'll be in their states. And it's under policy on our website, so if you're looking for it, just go navigate to policy and then in the states. And there's an interactive map which you can select your state, and it will tell you all the information you need to know about when they'll be coming to visit, if they're holding a town hall, stuff like that. So if you're looking, to maybe reach out to them in person while they're back in their districts or states, that's a great way to do it. But you have to remember that's not the only way you can reach them. You can reach them at any time. Despite popular beliefs, elected officials do listen to their constituents often. They take a great deal of consideration when considering bills, what their constituents say. So it's definitely very important to reach out to them. Are there any further questions? If you have, let me say this before I continue. If you have any additional questions that I don't answer here, or you think of later, or if you're watching this recorded, please feel free to email me. My email is included in the last slide and will be available online. It doesn't look like we have any further questions, so I would like to thank you. Oh, well, actually, just one right at the time there. Could you allude to filibuster? All right, so basically, filibuster, it's a very, very complex thing and has had many rule changes over the last few years especially. There was just a rule change at the beginning of this Congress. The simplest explanation of a filibuster is it's a tactic used to delay either debate on a bill or consideration for a bill. So if a bill is up on the floor of either chamber, representative or senator can basically, call a filibuster into motion, which the way it used to be done is they used to have to get up and talk for hours on end. So, like I said, if you've paid attention to the news recently, there's been talk of a 13-hour filibuster that just ended yesterday, which was used to delay vote on a nomination. A filibuster is important tool for typically the minority party in each chamber, as it's a way for them to kind of make sure they have their voices heard as far as the policy goes. If they don't want a bill, if they want to try and delay a bill from being considered or trying to get a bill, off the table, they might invoke a filibuster to kind of help, kill momentum on it, get it out of the news cycle, or sometimes it's used to waste time to help do that. One of the more famous examples is there was a 24-hour filibuster at which one point a cookbook was read and a phone book was literally read. So it doesn't always have to be substantive debate. The one that happened yesterday did have an actual purpose to it. It was actually used to talk about an issue, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you'll get some ridiculous stuff happening. That will make it a little less exciting, I guess, for most people. But a filibuster could be a very serious matter, especially when certain bills are coming up and they may be time sensitive. So either if you're talking about, say, federal aid in a disaster, or a budget reconciliation bill to help do that, or you're running into bills at the end of the Congress trying to get a whole bunch through before the Congress expires, and somebody's filibustering bills, they're going to make a lot of people mad, but they're also going to stop the process from moving forward, which could kill quite a few bills. All right. Well, thank you all for your questions today, and thank you for your time. I enjoyed having you on. If you have any further questions, please feel free to email me at this time. Or if you have any questions about Symposium, you can feel free to email them to sarah.miller@usa.childcareaware.org, and she'll be happy to answer them. Once again, I appreciate you being on for this, and have a nice day.